What started as a light-hearted interview turned into one of the most emotional moments ever caught on daytime television. When Whoopi Goldberg joked about Michael B. Jordan's necklace on live TV, she had no idea what that simple piece of metal meant to him, or what it would unleash. As the laughter faded and his eyes locked onto hers, the air in the studio changed. What he said next not only silenced the room, it shook the internet to its core. What was the real story behind that dog tag? And why did it leave a legend like Whoopi speechless? The studio lights glowed a little too bright that afternoon as the cameras rolled and the audience clapped enthusiastically. It was supposed to be just another episode of The View, filled with laughter, celebrity banter, and hot takes on headlines. Michael B. Jordan sat poised on the couch, flashing his usual warm smile, dressed in a crisp black shirt that revealed a single silver dog tag hanging just below the collar. As the show rolled into the celebrity spotlight segment, Whoopi Goldberg leaned over playfully, squinting at the necklace. With a grin and a casual chuckle, she quipped, "Now what's with that? Are you trying to bring dog tags back into fashion?" The audience chuckled softly, unsure whether to fully laugh or stay quiet. Michael gave a slight smile, but his hand instinctively rose to touch the tag gently. The silence that followed didn't match the usual energy of the show. Whoopi, sensing the drop in the room's mood, tried to shift, adding, "I mean, it's just a bit old school, right?" But the words lingered longer than she intended. Michael turned toward her, the corners of his mouth still lifted, but his eyes, they told another story. It wasn't offense. It wasn't anger. It was something heavier. His fingers tightened around the tag, and his voice didn't come immediately. The room waited. The audience sensed something had shifted. The laughter had faded completely now. Co-hosts looked at each other awkwardly. Producers behind the camera exchanged glances. Michael leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but deep with weight. "It means more than you think," he said. That was all he gave. No further explanation, no jokes to smooth things over. The moment sat uncomfortably in everyone's chest. Whoopi, for the first time that episode, didn't have a comeback. She blinked. The segment quickly moved on to a new topic, but the air was thick. Something unspoken had taken center stage. Viewers watching from home took to Twitter immediately. Clips of the exchange were online within minutes, looping Michael's expression, Whoopi's question, and that one sentence he gave in return. The moment went viral before the end of the show. Headlines began to pop up. Michael B. Jordan goes silent after Whoopi's comment on his necklace. Memes flooded timelines, but so did questions. What was that dog tag? Why did it matter so much to him? And why didn't he say more? Some called Whoopi insensitive, others said she was just joking. But all agreed, Michael's reaction wasn't the typical Hollywood brush-off. It was deeper. It was real. The following hours would only build more tension, as rumors swirled, and fans demanded an explanation. But none came that night. Just a short clip that played again and again, with a single sentence that left the world hanging, "It means more than you think." Years before the cameras and red carpets, long before anyone knew his name, Michael was just a quiet kid growing up in Newark, New Jersey. He lived in a small apartment with his mother and younger sister, while his father, James B. Jordan, served in the U.S. Army. Michael idolized his dad, not because he was a soldier, but because he was a man who never raised his voice, never broke a promise, and somehow made Michael feel safe even from thousands of miles away. They talked over grainy video calls and sent letters back and forth, the kind written on worn paper and folded too many times. Every time a letter arrived, Michael would run home from school like it was Christmas morning. One night, when Michael was just 13, everything changed. His mother got a call. She didn't cry at first. She sat perfectly still, holding the phone to her ear like it was made of glass. When she hung up, she walked over to the couch and sat beside Michael without speaking. The silence was louder than any words. His father had died overseas. It was a mission gone wrong, something classified. There were no details, just finality. Michael remembered that night not in colors, but in sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the muffled sobs of his sister, and the sound of his own heartbeat, pounding as if trying to escape. Days later, a small package arrived in the mail. Inside was a folded American flag, a few personal effects, and the dog tag. Michael didn't know what to do with it at first. It felt cold, foreign. But his mother placed it in his hand and said, "He wanted you to have it." It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a symbol. His name. His blood type. The numbers that marked his life. And in tiny engraving on the back, barely visible unless the light hit it right, were the words, "My son, my strength." Michael cried harder than he ever had before. Not because of the pain, but because he understood, this was the last message his father had ever sent. From that day on, the dog tag never left Michael's neck. It wasn't for show. It wasn't for style. It was his way of holding onto the man who had shaped him. Every audition he ever bombed, every success he ever earned, that tag was with him. He would clutch it before walking onto stage, rub it before stepping onto a set. When he got his first major role, he didn't celebrate with champagne or a party. He sat alone on his balcony, holding the tag in his hand, whispering thanks to the man who had missed every moment, but who had given him the strength to reach them. Over time, people noticed it. Stylists would try to suggest accessories, but he always said no. "Just the tag," he'd say. And though he never explained why, everyone who worked closely with him knew not to ask. It was personal. It was sacred. And no one touched it. Not until that moment on live television. Not until Whoopi's careless joke. Not until the sound of that laugh echoed through the studio and collided with the memory of a boy holding a metal tag in a quiet apartment, trying to make sense of loss. For the world, it was just an awkward TV moment. For Michael, it was something else. Something much deeper. The day after the episode aired, the internet became a wildfire. The clip of Whoopi's joke, paired with Michael's silent reaction, racked up millions of views in hours. Social media split into chaos. On one side, people laughed, saying it was harmless and meant to be funny. On the other, fans and veterans spoke out with fire, demanding respect and calling out the moment for what it was: insensitive, careless, and deeply personal. Hashtags exploded, #respect the tag, #Michael deserved better, and #veterans matter. News anchors debated it, late-night hosts joked about it, and daytime panels replayed the moment on loop. But Michael, he stayed quiet. He didn't post. He didn't explain. He didn't even respond to the storm swirling around him. The silence only added fuel. Paparazzi tried to catch him out in public, but every time he was seen, the same dog tag still hung from his neck. He said nothing, but his expression said everything. It wasn't anger, it was restraint. The restraint of someone holding something back. Studios reached out to his team, wondering if he would address it. One producer even offered him airtime on a rival network to clear the air and own the moment. But Michael refused every offer. Behind closed doors, his team was divided. Some felt it was time to release a statement, others begged him to keep it private. But Michael wasn't thinking about strategy. He was thinking about his father. He remembered what his mother used to say about his dad. "Your father believed silence could be louder than shouting." And that line played in his mind again and again. But deep down, he also knew his silence wasn't protecting just himself anymore. The more he stayed quiet, the more people filled in the blanks. Rumors began to spread. That the tag was fake. That it was just a prop. That Michael was being overdramatic. And that was the moment the line was crossed. When people began to rewrite the meaning of the dog tag, not just dismiss it, but twist it into something cheap. He watched a podcast host hold up a replica of a dog tag and joke, "Guess I'm a war hero now too." That night, Michael sat alone in his apartment, the tag in his hand, his thumb brushing over the words, "My son, my strength." He felt the pull. Not from the media. Not even from the audience. But from something deeper. A voice that sounded like his father's. A voice that told him, "Say something, not for them, for you." And yet, speaking meant opening wounds. It meant exposing a piece of his soul he had kept guarded for years. The next morning, he woke up and made a decision. He called the studio back. Not to argue. Not to cancel. But to ask if he could return. "Just 5 minutes," he said. Just 5 minutes to say something that had been buried for too long. The producers were stunned, but agreed. And as the show announced his return, the buzz reignited. What was he going to say? Would he confront Whoopi? Would he reveal something no one expected? The day arrived fast. The studio filled with more press than usual. Everyone's eyes were on the couch where he would sit. Whoopi looked nervous, fiddling with her notes. Even the other co-hosts looked uneasy, unsure if they should brace for a storm or a moment of healing. The audience held its breath. When Michael walked out, the room fell quiet. The dog tag was still around his neck, but something in his posture had changed. He didn't come to fight. He didn't come to shame. He came to speak, not as a star, not as a guest, but as a son. As the show prepared for Michael's return, tension buzzed in the air like static before a storm. The set looked the same, bright, modern, polished, but behind the cameras, everything had changed. Producers held whispered meetings in corners, unsure how this segment might unfold. Whoopi, usually calm and confident, was visibly uneasy. Her usual wit felt muted. She scanned the cue cards but couldn't focus. The internet had already declared this moment as TV history in the making, and every outlet from blogs to major news stations was ready to dissect it in real time. But Michael wasn't thinking about headlines. Sitting quietly in his dressing room, he looked at his father's dog tag, turning it slowly between his fingers like he had done 1,000 times before. He wasn't rehearsing a speech. He didn't write one. He just listened to the silence and let the weight of the moment settle into his chest. A knock on the door came too quickly. 5 minutes, a voice called softly. Michael stood, checked the mirror, adjusted nothing, and walked out. Each step down the hallway felt like walking toward a memory he couldn't ignore. Backstage, he could see the set through the curtain. The hosts were chatting, trying to warm up the audience. They smiled, but everyone felt the strain. There wasn't an inch of the studio that wasn't aware of what was about to happen. And then, the music played. The announcer's voice rang out, "Please welcome back, Michael B. Jordan." Applause followed, loud but unsure. He stepped out, smiled politely, and took his seat. The same seat. The same lighting. The same necklace. Whoopi greeted him, her voice just slightly shakier than usual. "Michael, thank you for coming back," she said. He nodded once and said, "Thank you for having me." And just like that, the air thickened. Everyone waited for the punch, the confrontation, the dramatic clapback that headlines were hoping for. But Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply looked down at the tag around his neck and began to speak. "When I was 13, he said, "my dad died in combat. I didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't get to ask him the questions I carry every day. But I got this." He held up the tag gently. "This was on him when they found him. It's not just metal to me. It's the last thing he ever touched." The audience went completely silent. Even the cameras seemed to hum more quietly, capturing each word like they were sacred. Michael continued, his voice calm, steady. "People sometimes forget that what we wear, what we hold on to, it means something. It tells a story. This tag, this isn't jewelry. It's my anchor. It's my memory. It's my father." One of the co-hosts wiped her eyes. Whoopi didn't interrupt. She looked down, lips pressed together, clearly shaken. Michael looked around the room. "I'm not mad. I know jokes are part of this world. I laugh at myself, too. But sometimes we joke about things we don't understand. And sometimes, silence is the better response." The message was clear, but it wasn't angry. It was honest. It wasn't about canceling anyone. It was about remembering what matters. The crowd, once holding back emotion, now sat fully engaged, leaning forward in their seats. Some had tears. Some nodded. It had become something bigger than a TV moment. It was about every person who'd lost someone. Every child who wore something that carried more weight than the world could see. Michael looked back at Whoopi, and she looked up at him, her eyes glassy. She gave a slow nod. No one said it, but the apology was understood. The segment ended without music. No jokes. No quick transitions. Just Michael placing the tag gently against his chest and thanking them for letting him share. As the show cut to commercial, the audience stayed quiet. There was nothing to say. Nothing that could follow what had just happened. Michael walked off stage, past the same hallway he'd entered from, and returned to his dressing room in silence. But outside those walls, something had shifted. Not just in the show, not just in the audience, but across the world. In the days that followed Michael's quiet return to the view, the moment was everywhere. News stations replayed it. Headlines praised his calm strength. Veterans groups publicly thanked him. Parents who had lost children in the service posted pictures of their own mementos, dog tags hanging from rearview mirrors or tucked into lockets. It resonated far beyond what anyone had expected. But just when people thought they understood the full story, Michael did something no one saw coming. He released a video. No glamour, no professional lighting, just a phone camera and a couch. In the clip, he sat holding the dog tag and looked straight into the lens. What he said next would become the emotional turning point of everything that came before it. He started with a question. What do you do when the last words from your father are something you never actually heard, but you still carry them every day? He then flipped the dog tag and showed the engraving, "My son, my strength." He explained that those words weren't added by his dad. They were already there when the military returned the tag. It was a custom engraving, a message added at some point before his father's final deployment. No one knew exactly when he'd done it. Not his mother. Not his commanding officer. It wasn't listed in any report. But it was there, etched deep in the metal like a secret meant to be discovered only when he was gone. Michael held up a folded letter. He said he hadn't shared it with anyone before, not even the press. The letter was found in his father's belongings, sealed, marked with Michael's name. In the letter, his father had written about feeling scared, not of the mission, but of leaving his family behind. He wrote that he wasn't sure he'd make it back and wanted to leave something small but strong behind. If this reaches you, son, the letter read, I want you to know something about strength. It's not about holding back tears or staying silent when you're hurting. It's about choosing who you become when the world tries to break you. Michael stopped for a moment, trying to steady his voice. This isn't just a dog tag, he said. It's a reminder that my strength isn't mine alone. It came from him. It lives in me now. The video cut off with no music, no fade out. Just a black screen. But within an hour, it was trending worldwide. Comments poured in, people telling their own stories of loss, of symbols they wore every day that meant more than others could see. And then something else happened. Whoopi Goldberg posted her own video. In it, she sat alone, no makeup, no flashy set, just her in a quiet room. She looked straight into the camera and said, I watched your video, Michael. And I cried. I'm sorry. Not just for the joke, but for not realizing sooner how much weight a small thing can carry. Thank you for reminding me that sometimes we laugh to fill silence, but that silence is where truth often lives. The two videos were shared together like chapters in a story. Not of conflict, but of understanding. And that shift was the twist no one expected. People didn't walk away from it angry, they walked away changed. Schools used the clips in classes about empathy. A museum exhibit was created honoring mementos from lost soldiers, with Michael's dog tag and his father's letter featured front and center. But Michael didn't do it for attention. He didn't do it for sympathy. He did it to tell the truth. The truth that sometimes a piece of metal carries more history than a library. That sometimes strength is not in what we show, but in what we carry when no one is watching. And the most powerful moment. The last line in his father's letter, one Michael hadn't read in public until that day. You were born from my strength, but you'll live by your own. Make it count. Michael folded the letter slowly and placed it back in the envelope, the same way he had every year on his father's birthday. And when he looked up at the camera, he didn't say anything more. He didn't have to. Because the silence that followed said everything. The next time Michael B. Jordan stepped into a studio, the atmosphere was different. It wasn't about promotion. It wasn't about interviews. It was about purpose. The video he'd released had created ripples that reached far beyond the entertainment industry. Military families, grief counselors, Even schools reached out to his team asking to share his father's letter and the dog tag story. Within weeks, Michael had been invited to speak at a veterans tribute in Washington, D.C., not as a celebrity, but as a son. He stood on that stage with no script in hand, looking out at rows of people holding photos of their loved ones. Some wore dog tags around their necks. Some clutched them in their hands. Every one of them knew the weight of what he carried. He told the crowd that he used to think strength was about doing everything alone, about pushing through without looking back. But that wasn't what his father meant. His father's message was about knowing when to stand still, when to remember, when to speak. The crowd didn't cheer wildly or burst into applause. They stood quietly. Some cried. Some nodded. But all of them understood. Because this moment wasn't for the cameras, it was for healing. After the speech, a retired general approached him and placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. "Your father would be proud," he said softly. "You honored him the way a soldier hopes to be remembered, not with noise, but with truth." Meanwhile, The View also changed. In a special segment a month after the incident, the show invited veterans and their families to share stories about items they kept to feel connected. Lockets, letters, photos, medals. Whoopi introduced the segment with a new tone. No jokes. No sarcasm. She admitted to the audience that she had learned something important, something that had humbled her. "We never know what people carry," she said. "So maybe it's time we stop laughing at what we don't understand and start listening instead." That day, the set that once held awkward laughter now held quiet reflection. It was no longer about one man's necklace. It had become something bigger. Michael didn't need to return to that show again. He didn't need to respond to every comment or correct every article. The story had already been told. And most importantly, it had been felt. What lingered was not the moment of mockery, but the moment of meaning. The dog tag, once mistaken for a fashion piece, now stood as a symbol for something millions could relate to: loss, memory, and the silent strength passed down through generations. And yet, Michael still didn't wear it to be seen. He wore it because it was part of him. He never took it off. Not for press. Not for red carpets. Not even in private. Because to take it off would be to put the memory down, and that was something he had never been ready to do. Years later, in an interview with a quiet podcast host far from the spotlight, Michael spoke of that time. The host asked him what he hoped people learned from all of it. Michael paused and said, "I hope they remember that silence isn't weakness. That some of the strongest things we carry are the ones no one sees." He looked down, touched the tag, and added, "It's not about the story that got told on TV. It's about the one I've lived every day since." The episode didn't go viral. There were no trending hashtags. But those who listened walked away feeling something they couldn't quite explain. And that was enough. Because some stories aren't meant to end with applause. Some are meant to echo. Quietly. Deeply. Forever.